After the tragic death of my parents, my cruel mother-in-law treated me like a slave during a family gathering. She called me a poor abandoned girl, and my husband laughed at me. Then suddenly, an old wealthy man entered the venue and said, "Embrace me, my daughter." Everyone was stunned, but when he delivered his next shocking surprise, my husband and mother-in-law were on their knees. My name is Lisa, and my life has been anything but ordinary. Growing up in Denver, Colorado, I used to think my world was perfect, but everything changed when I was just 8 years old. A fire swept through our home one night while we were all asleep. The flames swallowed everything, the walls, the furniture, and, worst of all, my parents. I can still hear their voices calling out to me through the smoke, but I never saw them again. That night, my entire life burned to ashes, leaving me with nothing but questions and pain. With no family to take me in, I was placed in the foster care system. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I thought someone would come for me, a grandparent, an aunt, maybe even a family friend, but nobody came. I was just a little girl, abandoned and alone, moving from one foster home to another. Each family was different, but none of them felt like home. Some were kind, others indifferent, and a few downright cold. For 5 years, I lived that way, never settling, always hoping for something better. That something better finally came when I was 13. A couple, the Carters, visited the group home I was staying at. They weren't like the other people I'd met before. Mr. Carter had a warm fatherly smile, and Mrs. Carter's eyes sparkled with kindness. They owned a thriving technology business in Denver, and though they were incredibly successful, they seemed down to earth. When they chose to adopt me, I couldn't believe it. For the first time in years, I had parents again, people who loved me and wanted me to succeed. Life with the Carters was like stepping into a different world. Their house was enormous, with rooms I didn't even know what to do with. But more than the material comforts, they gave me love, guidance, and security. They encouraged me to dream big and always reminded me that I was capable of achieving anything. Despite their wealth, they taught me the value of hard work and humility. I worked hard in school and managed to get a full scholarship to a prestigious college in Boulder, where I studied environmental science. It was there, during my sophomore year, that I met Jack. He was studying engineering, and we had a few mutual friends. Jack was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: charming, funny, and endlessly supportive. He had this way of making me feel special, like I was the only person in the room. One day after class, Jack came up to me and said, "Lisa, I've noticed you're always the first one to ask questions during lectures. What's your secret? Do you have a time machine or something?" I laughed, and that was the start of everything. We began spending time together, studying, grabbing coffee, and talking about everything from our favorite movies to our biggest dreams. Jack told me he came from a wealthy family in Chicago. His parents, Amanda and Robert, owned several luxury hotels and were known for their glamorous parties and high society connections. "They're a little particular about people," Jack admitted once when we were talking about our families. At the time, I didn't think much of it. After all, Jack seemed different, grounded and kind. As our relationship grew, I hesitated to tell Jack about my past. I didn't want to be seen as the poor abandoned girl he needed to save. So, I avoided the topic, focusing instead on the life I was building with him. By the time we graduated, Jack and I were inseparable. He proposed during a hike in the Rockies, and I said yes without hesitation. I believed we could handle anything as long as we were together. But reality has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. The first crack in our perfect world appeared when Jack wanted me to meet his parents. I was excited but also nervous. Jack warned me, "They can be tough, just be yourself, and everything will be fine." I tried to put my worries aside, reminding myself that Jack loved me and that his parents' opinions didn't matter. The dinner was held at one of their luxury hotels in Chicago. The moment I walked in, I felt like I didn't belong. The room was filled with chandeliers, polished floors, and people dressed in designer clothes. Amanda greeted me with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Robert barely acknowledged me throughout the evening. They spoke only to Jack, treating me as if I were invisible. When Amanda finally addressed me, her words were sharp. "So, Lisa," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Jack tells us you studied on a scholarship. Impressive, but I assume that's because there wasn't much of a family fortune to fall back on, was there?" I felt my cheeks burn, but I forced a polite smile. "I've been fortunate to have great support from my adoptive parents," I replied, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Amanda's charitable comment stung. Jack's silence during the exchange hurt even more than her words. I had always thought he would defend me, but instead, he stared down at his plate, avoiding my gaze. As we left the dinner, I couldn't hold back my tears. "Jack, why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I didn't want to make a scene," he replied, looking uncomfortable. "They'll come around, just give them time." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a storm I wasn't prepared for. I tried to convince myself that Jack was right, that his parents just needed time to get to know me. But deep down, I felt uneasy. Amanda and Robert's disapproving stares and veiled comments replayed in my mind. I told myself to be patient, to focus on the love Jack and I shared. But patience can only take you so far when you're constantly made to feel small. The weeks after that dinner were tense. Jack began spending more time on work projects, and I felt like I was losing the connection we once had. I tried talking to him about how his parents made me feel, but his responses were always the same. "It's just how they are, Lisa. Don't take it personally." Easy for him to say, he wasn't the one being judged. When his parents hosted another dinner, this time at their estate in Chicago, Jack insisted we attend. "It's important to them, Lisa. They want us to be part of the family," he said. I reluctantly agreed, hoping this could be an opportunity to mend things. Walking into their sprawling mansion, I felt out of place again. The walls were adorned with expensive art, the kind you'd only see in galleries. As Amanda greeted us, her icy demeanor returned. "Lisa," she said with a forced smile, "how nice of you to join us." Her tone made it clear it wasn't nice at all throughout the evening. Amanda and Robert barely acknowledged me. When they did, it was only to make pointed remarks. "You know," Amanda said at one point, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "Jack has always had such exquisite taste. It's surprising, isn't it?" I wanted to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Jack, as usual, said nothing. Later that night, I pulled Jack aside. "Why don't you ever stand up for me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Do you not see how they treat me?" Jack sighed, clearly frustrated. "Lisa, you're reading too much into it. They're just traditional. They'll warm up eventually." "Traditional?" I snapped. "They called me Charity. How much more obvious can they make it that they don't want me here?" Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I love you, Lisa. Isn't that enough?" I didn't answer, because in that moment, I wasn't sure if it was. Weeks turned into months, and things didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. Jack's parents hosted a grand anniversary party, inviting hundreds of their high society friends. When Jack asked me to come, I hesitated. "Do you really want me there?" I asked. "Of course," he said, almost offended. "You're my fiancé." The party was held at a luxury ballroom in downtown Chicago. From the moment we arrived, it was clear I wasn't welcome. Guests whispered behind their champagne glasses, giving me sideways glances. I tried to stay close to Jack, but he was swept away in conversations with his parents and their friends. Every time I tried to join a group, I was met with cold stares or outright dismissal. By the time Amanda and Robert gave their anniversary speech, I was holding back tears. They thanked everyone for being an important part of their lives, pointedly excluding me. Then came the jokes, veiled insults aimed directly at me. "Jack has always had a soft spot for projects," Amanda quipped, causing laughter to ripple through the room. I felt like I was shrinking, like every eye in the room was on me, mocking me. Unable to take it anymore, I quietly left the party. I ordered a rideshare and cried the entire way home. When Jack came back later that night, he was furious. "Do you know how embarrassing that was for me?" he shouted. "For you?" I shot back. "What about me? Do you know how humiliating it was to be laughed at in front of all those people?" "You could have just stayed and dealt with it," he said, his tone sharp. "It was one night, Lisa. Couldn't you have done that for me?" I stared at him, stunned. This wasn't the Jack I fell in love with. "Your parents humiliated me, Jack, and instead of standing up for me, you're blaming me for leaving?" "They're my parents," he said firmly. "You don't just walk out on them." I felt a crack deep inside me, like something fundamental between us had broken. I slept on the couch that night, too hurt to even look at him. The following weeks were a blur of silence and tension. Jack continued attending his parents' weekly family dinners, but I stayed home. Every time he left, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I knew I was losing him, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my dignity for a relationship that felt increasingly one-sided. One evening, after another family dinner, Jack came home with a smug expression. "My parents expect an apology from you," he said, crossing his arms. "An apology?" I repeated, incredulous. "For what?" "For embarrassing them at the party," he said matter-of-factly. "And while you're at it, I think I deserve one too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "They insulted me, Jack." "They insulted us, and you think I should apologize?" "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "It's the least you can do to make things right." Something inside me snapped. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." "What do you mean?" Jack asked, his voice softening. "I mean I can't keep pretending this is okay," I replied. "I can't keep fighting for someone who won't fight for me." Jack didn't respond. He just stared at me as if he didn't know the woman standing in front of him. That night, I called my parents through tears. I told them everything. "We'll take care of it," my dad said, his voice steady, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I'll never forget the phone call I had with my parents that night. I poured out all the pain I'd been holding in, the insults, the judgment, and Jack's complete lack of support. My dad, calm and thoughtful as always, listened quietly before saying, "Lisa, no one has the right to treat you this way. You deserve better, and we'll make sure they understand that." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I trusted him. My parents had always been my rock, and I knew they wouldn't let me face this alone. A few days later, they arrived in Chicago. Seeing them again was like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. My mom hugged me tightly, and my dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We're here for you," my mom said firmly, "and it's time we set some things straight." My parents and I spent the next few days together, talking and planning. They made it clear that this wasn't just about standing up to Jack's family. It was about me reclaiming my self-worth. "Lisa, you've worked so hard to build a life for yourself," my dad said. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than what you are." When I told them about the weekly family dinners Jack's parents hosted, my dad's eyes lit up. "Perfect," he said. "We join them this week." I hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked. The thought of my parents confronting Amanda and Robert made me nervous. "Trust us," my mom said. "They need to see the real Lisa, the Lisa we know and love." The dinner was scheduled at an exclusive restaurant downtown. Jack had gone ahead without me as usual, but this time, I didn't stay home. Dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, I walked into the restaurant with my parents by my side. The moment we approached the table, all conversation stopped. Amanda and Robert froze, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. "Good evening," my dad said smoothly, his tone polite but firm. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Mr. Carter, Lisa's father." This is my wife. Amanda's smile was tight and strained. Oh, Mr. Carter. What a surprise, she said, her voice faltering. We didn't realize you were in town. We thought it was time we met, my mom said, her eyes narrowing slightly. After all, you've had so much to say about our daughter. Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. It's, good to meet you. I'm sure he didn't, my dad replied, taking a seat. But we're here now, and there are some things we need to discuss. Jack looked like he wanted to disappear. He avoided my gaze, fiddling with his napkin as my dad turned to Amanda and Robert. I understand you've had concerns about Lisa, he said. I'd like to hear them. Amanda's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. We've simply been trying to ensure that Jack's future is secure, she said. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal, my mom echoed, her voice sharp. Calling her a poor abandoned girl isn't personal. Amanda flushed. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, my dad interrupted. But let me set the record straight. Lisa is our daughter, and she's been part of a family far stronger and more successful than you seem to realize. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a portfolio, placing it on the table. Inside were documents detailing the Carter family business, its growth, its partnerships, and its considerable wealth. Amanda and Robert exchanged stunned looks as they skimmed the papers. You judged Lisa without knowing anything about her, my dad continued. You assumed she wasn't good enough for your son because of where she came from. But let me tell you, Lisa's worth isn't tied to wealth or status. It's tied to her strength, her kindness, and her integrity, qualities I'm not sure this family understands. Amanda tried to speak, but my mom cut her off. You've made Lisa feel like an outsider, but the truth is, she's out of your league. And now that you know the truth, I hope you'll think twice before passing judgment on someone you don't know. My dad then turned to Jack, his expression cold. Lisa asked me to give you this, he said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside were the divorce papers I had signed earlier that day. Jack looked up at me, his eyes wide. Lisa, he said, his voice breaking. We can fix this. No, Jack, I said, my voice steady. You had your chance to fix it, but every time your family tore me down, you stood by and said nothing. I deserve better than that. The first time I felt free was as my parents and I stood to leave. Amanda and Robert remained silent, their faces pale. Jack didn't follow me, and I didn't look back. Walking out of that restaurant with my parents felt like shedding a weight I'd carried for far too long. For the first time in years, I could breathe. As we drove away, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt relief. My dad glanced at me in the rearview mirror. How do you feel, Lisa? He asked gently. Free, I said, and I meant it. The days following that dinner were a whirlwind. Jack signed the divorce papers without hesitation. Part of me thought he might fight for us, but I guess I already knew the answer. He had made his choice long ago. Every time he stood silent while his family tore me apart. His parents, however, weren't as accepting of the situation. They bombarded me with messages, some angry, others pleading. Tell your dad to back off, one text from Amanda read. He's ruining us. It didn't take long for my dad's influence to take effect. My parents' company had strong ties with several of the investors and partners that Robert and Amanda relied on for their hotel business. One by one, those partnerships dissolved. The family empire they had built on arrogance and elitism began to crumble, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I didn't feel guilty. They had mocked me for being a poor abandoned girl, and now they were learning what it felt like to be powerless. Meanwhile, my life was starting to take a new shape. My parents insisted on taking me on a trip to California, a much-needed escape from the chaos of the past few months. We spent days walking along sunny beaches, hiking through breathtaking trails, and talking late into the night. It was exactly what I needed to heal. My mom reminded me constantly that I was loved, and my dad encouraged me to think about my future. "You're strong, Lisa," he said one evening as we watched the sun set over the ocean. "And this is just the beginning for you." He was right. The experience with Jack and his family had taught me so much about myself. I realized how much I had sacrificed to make a relationship work with someone who didn't truly value me. It wasn't just about Jack's silence or his parents' cruelty, it was about my own belief that I had to prove my worth to people who would never see it. I promised myself I would never let that happen again. When we returned to Denver, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a new apartment, started a job with an environmental nonprofit, and reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. My parents continued to support me every step of the way, always reminding me that I was never alone. As for Jack and his family, I didn't hear much about them after the divorce was finalized. I did learn through mutual acquaintances that their financial troubles continued to worsen, and their lavish lifestyle became less sustainable. Part of me thought I'd feel satisfaction in hearing that, but in truth, I didn't care. I was too busy moving forward to dwell on their downfall. Looking back now, I see that chapter of my life as both painful and transformative. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when it comes from someone you thought would always stand by you. But resilience runs deeper. I found strength in my pain and turned it into something powerful, a new beginning, a fresh start. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: self-respect is not negotiable. You can't force someone to see your worth, and you shouldn't have to. The people who truly care for you will never make you question it. My parents taught me that, and for that, I will always be grateful. Today, I'm proud of the person I've become. I've left behind the toxic relationships and the need for validation from others. My story isn't one of defeat, it's one of triumph. And as I stand here, looking ahead to the future, I know that the best is yet to come.